An important part of risk management is understanding risk vectors. Think of things like mission-critical IT systems that might be related to payment processing or internal human resources systems, and of course, things like emergency systems. Think 911. But besides the systems, what about their resultant data? We have to know what data we have and where it resides in order to properly manage any risks related to that data. We also have to think about third-party access to data, whether we have third-party components we might be using within our environment, software components, or whether we might have third-party entities like contractors working in our systems. Those are also attack vectors that we need to be aware of. And then there are physical risk vectors. Physical risk vectors would mean things like access control vestibules, getting into a facility. Have you ever gone into a building where a second internal door will only open after the first external door has completely closed and locked? That's an access control vestibule or a man trap. We can also have security built into our facilities to get into server rooms, having locked server rooms, the racks of equipment in a server room having locks so they can only be accessed by authorized personnel. And also maybe even limiting booting from removable media. Do we really want to allow servers to be booted up from CD or DVD or removable thumb drives? Because in that case, if someone gains physical access, for example, to a server, they could boot off that media and potentially reset an administrator password. That, of course, would be thwarted if we had enabled disk volume encryption on the underlying disk. But there are a number of physical vectors that are related to risk that we need to think about. Now, the way that we manage a lot of these risk vectors is through a risk management framework, an RMF, and there are plenty of them out there related to IT security. Things like the Center for Internet Security, or CIS, publishes a number of cybersecurity best practices. Then we have the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States, the NIST, which has the NIST Risk Management Framework, or RMF, also referred to as the Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF. So this is all about cybersecurity risk management. There are other ones available as well on an international level, at the ISO and IEC level, such as standards related to 27001, 27002, 27701, 31000. All of these are international standards that are related to IT system and information security. So really, risk management. Then in the financial side of things, we've got ways to verify the integrity of financial documents with internal controls. These are called the SSAE SOC 2 controls. There are different categories of SOC 2 controls, type 1 and type 2, that look at different ways of controlling access to processes and the resultant financial documents within an organization. NIST Special Publication, or SP 800-30, Revision 1, is the guide for conducting risk assessments. So we've got guidelines step by step on how to conduct a risk assessment. Why don't we take a look at Special Publication 800-30 for a second? Here in my web browser on the NIST website, I've searched for that specific publication where I can get a local download for free, a PDF download of that document for conducting risk assessments. And as I go through and read this PDF, I get details related to exactly what should be done when we conduct a risk assessment, which means, first of all, understanding what you have for assets and what the risks are that are related to those assets. And when it comes to risk management, we can't forget about data privacy standards and regulations. Now, there are some international standards that apply to any organization in the world dealing with certain types of data. And then there are some that are jurisdictional. They apply only when data, for example, is stored within a certain country. Only certain laws would apply. So let's talk about the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR. The GDPR applies to the private information related to European Union or EU citizens, regardless of where that information is being processed or gathered or shared. As long as it's EU citizen data, the GDPR data privacy rules will apply. In the United States, we have the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, otherwise called HIPAA. HIPAA is really designed to protect American patient medical information. Then internationally, we've got the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS. Now, this standard is going to apply to any organization that's dealing with cardholder information, whether it's debit cards or credit cards like Visa or MasterCard. Now, what happens with PCI DSS is we get recommendations on how to harden the environment and protect cardholder information without specifying exact configuration details. You'll see what I mean. Let's take a look. Here in my web browser, I've navigated to the PCI Compliance Guide website, and I'm looking at the frequently asked questions, the FAQ. And as I go further down on this webpage where it talks about PCI DSS and how to determine if you're compliant, or even the definition of who a merchant is that might be working with sensitive cardholder information. So we can go through and read all of these details to begin to learn more about how to manage the risk of dealing with cardholder information. Now, those are information sources that are related to managing risk. How do we enact that within the organization? We do that by crafting our security policies to mirror those requirements. So we might have acceptable use policies, AUPs, that are related to how employees are allowed to use email for business purposes only, or if they're allowed to access social media sites, or what they're allowed to post in social media, where they're allowed to browse to on the internet. All of that stuff falls under the realm of acceptable use policies. Then we've got resource access policies, such as being allowed to access apps or files on file servers. Account policies, which would dictate how accounts can be hardened, such as requiring multi-factor authentication or complex passwords. Data retention policies, which is often usually dictated by regulations. For example, in the finance industry, you might have to retain data for a period of time to be compliant with that regulation. There are change control and asset management policies that will apply to the IT team, where there is a standard, repeatable, definable process for implementing change in a controlled manner. So we have a lot of different ways then that we can manage risk within our environments by looking at these standards or laws and regulations.